Hey there, take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let tonight's story gently guide you into a peaceful sleep. The rain had been falling for hours, a soft, steady hush against the windows of the Lantern Coffee Shop, the kind of rain that made the city feel smaller, quieter, more forgiving. It was just past midnight on a Tuesday in early November, and the streets of Portland's Alberta Arts District were nearly empty, only the occasional swish of tires on wet asphalt, the distant glow of a neon sign flickering across puddles, and the low hum of the shop's old radiator working overtime against the damp chill. Inside, the light was low and golden, the color of honey held up to a lamp. A single Edison bulb hung over each scarred wooden table, casting pools of warmth that didn't quite reach the corners, where shadows gathered like thoughtful old friends. The air carried the deep, comforting scent of dark roast coffee mingled with notes of cardamom and cinnamon from the chai steamer someone had ordered an hour ago and never quite finished. A vinyl record spun lazily on the turntable behind the counter, Bill Evans, his piano notes drifting slow and deliberate, like someone walking barefoot across cool tile, not in any hurry to arrive anywhere. Elena pushed through the door just after 12:17 a.m., her coat speckled with rain, her dark hair curling at the ends from the humidity. She was 42, though on nights like this she felt both older and younger at once, older in the ache behind her eyes from too many hours staring at spreadsheets, younger in the way her heart still lifted at small, ordinary beauties like the smell of coffee in a warm room. She had no real reason to be out this late, her apartment was only 6 blocks away, and the sensible thing would have been to go straight home after her shift at the hospital ended, to heat leftover soup and fall into bed. But the thought of the empty rooms waiting for her had felt heavier than the rain, so she turned left instead of right, drawn by the faint glow of the lantern sign that somehow always stayed on, no matter how late. The barista tonight was Marcus, a gentle giant of a man in his late 30s with a close-trimmed beard and sleeves of tattoos that told stories of places he'd been before he landed here. He looked up when the bell above the door chimed and offered the small, familiar nod he reserved for regulars who didn't need to speak their order aloud. Elena lifted 2 fingers, her usual, a decaf pour-over with a splash of oat milk, and he was already reaching for the kettle before she'd even chosen a table. She picked the one in the far corner by the window, the one with the slight wobble that no one had ever bothered to fix, and settled into the worn leather armchair that had molded itself to countless bodies over the years. Outside, the streetlight painted silver ripples across the wet pavement. Inside, the world felt held, suspended, safe. There were only 4 other people in the shop tonight. At the long communal table near the pastry case sat a young woman in a University of Oregon hoodie, earbuds in, typing furiously on a laptop whose screen cast a blue glow across her tired face, probably cramming for midterms, Elena guessed, remembering her own all-nighters decades ago. 2 stools down from her, an older man in a knit cap nursed a mug of black coffee and read a paperback with yellowed pages, turning them slowly, deliberately, as though savoring every line. Near the front, a couple in their late 20s shared a single slice of Marionberry pie, speaking in low murmurs, their knees touching under the table. And that was all. 5 souls, including Marcus, moving quietly through the amber light, each carrying their own private weather. Elena wrapped her cold hands around the warm ceramic mug when Marcus brought it over. "Rough shift?" he asked, voice low, the way people speak in libraries or churches. She gave a small shrug that meant yes and no at once. "Busy," she said. "But the good kind of busy. A baby was born at 10:42. Healthy boy. Mom cried happy tears for 20 minutes straight." Marcus smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. "That's something worth staying late for," he said, and moved back behind the counter, leaving her with the gentle clink of cups and the soft hiss of steam. She sipped her coffee and let the warmth travel all the way down, settling in her chest like a small animal curling up to sleep. The piano on the record shifted into Peace Peace, those long, lingering chords that seemed to stretch time itself. Elena closed her eyes for a moment and simply listened, letting the notes wash over her. She thought about the new mother she'd helped tonight, 24 years old, terrified and brave, gripping Elena's hand so tightly during transition that her knuckles went white. Elena had whispered the same words she always whispered, "You're doing beautifully. You're stronger than you know. Breathe with me." And then, miraculously, the baby had arrived, red and squalling and perfect, and the young father had sobbed openly while the grandmother video-called from Texas and cried too. Moments like that were why Elena still worked labor and delivery after 20 years, moments that reminded her the world could still surprise you with tenderness. But tonight, in the quiet aftermath, she felt the familiar ache of her own empty arms. She and Daniel had wanted children once. They'd talked about it the way young couples do, casually at first, then seriously, picking out names on long drives up the coast, imagining a little girl with Daniel's hazel eyes or a boy who loved books the way Elena did. But life had taken its own turns, the miscarriage at 12 weeks, the second one at 9, the tests and the specialists and the quiet, mutual decision to stop trying. Daniel had stayed for a while after that, trying hard to be enough for each other, but grief is a third presence in a marriage, and eventually it crowded them out. He moved to Seattle 8 years ago. They still exchanged Christmas cards, polite and careful, like people handling fragile glass. Elena opened her eyes and watched rain slide down the window in slow rivulets. She wasn't bitter, not really. Sad, sometimes, the way you can be sad about a road you didn't take without regretting the one you did. She loved her work, loved her small circle of friends, loved the tiny backyard garden she tended on weekends. But on nights like this, when the city was hushed and the light was soft, the loneliness rose gently, like tide, not a wave crashing but a slow, inevitable filling of space. Across the room, the young student closed her laptop with a quiet snap and rubbed her eyes. She looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that only comes from carrying too much hope and too much fear at once. Elena recognized it immediately. She'd worn that same look at 21, working double shifts to pay for nursing school, terrified she'd never be smart enough or strong enough. On impulse, Elena stood, walked to the pastry case, and bought a chocolate chip cookie still warm from the oven. She carried it over and set it beside the girl's empty mug. The student looked up, startled. "You looked like you could use this," Elena said simply. The girl's eyes filled suddenly, and she laughed a small, embarrassed laugh. "God, thank you. I think I'm running on fumes." Elena smiled and returned to her seat, feeling the small warmth of having done something kind for no reason other than it felt right. Marcus changed the record. Now it was Norah Jones, her voice low and smoky, singing about coming home to somebody. The older man in the knit cap closed his book, stretched, and stood. He nodded at Marcus, left a $5 bill under his saucer even though his coffee had been only $2.50, and stepped out into the rain without an umbrella. The young couple finished their pie, the woman resting her head briefly on the man's shoulder before they gathered their coats and left, hands linked. The student ate half the cookie, packed up her things, and on her way out paused by Elena's table. "Thank you again," she said softly. "That was really kind." Elena just smiled. "Pay it forward when you can," she said. The girl nodded, as if committing it to memory, and disappeared into the night. Now it was just Elena and Marcus. The shop felt even quieter, the rain a constant murmur against the roof. Marcus wiped down the counter slowly, unhurried. He'd worked here for 12 years, ever since getting sober, and he knew the rhythms of late nights better than most. Some nights the shop filled with laughter and loud conversation, other nights, like this one, it became a kind of sanctuary, a place where people could simply be without having to perform happiness. Elena finished her coffee and carried the mug to the counter. "You closing soon?" she asked. Marcus glanced at the old wall clock. "Officially in 20 minutes, but I never kick anyone out if they're not ready to leave." He rinsed her mug, set it in the dish rack. "You okay tonight, Elena?" He didn't ask it in the way people usually did, with that bright, brittle cheer that expected a quick, "fine." He asked it the way you ask the weather of an old friend, quietly, giving space for the truth. She leaned against the counter, considering. "I think so," she said finally. "Just, feeling the weight of things, you know. The good weight and the hard weight both." Marcus nodded, drying his hands on a towel. "I know it." He reached under the counter and pulled out a small tin of chamomile tea he kept for nights like this. "Want something softer before you head home?" She nodded, grateful. While the tea steeped, they talked in the unhurried way people do when there's no need to fill every silence. He told her about the stray cat that had started hanging around the back door, gray with one torn ear, too proud to come inside but willing to accept bits of turkey on cold nights. She told him about the baby born tonight, how the father had cut the cord with shaking hands and then kissed his wife's forehead like she was made of something sacred. They didn't talk about loneliness directly, but it sat between them anyway, acknowledged and unafraid. When the tea was ready, Marcus poured it into a to-go cup even though Elena hadn't asked. "For the walk home," he said. "It's still raining." She thanked him, left a 10 under her saucer for a $4 tea, and pulled on her coat. At the door she paused, looking back at the warm room, the soft lights, the rain-streaked windows. "Marcus," she said, "thank you for keeping this place open late. I don't know what I'd do some nights without it." He smiled, that same eye-reaching smile. "We keep it open because people need it," he said. "And because some nights, I need it too." Outside, the rain had eased to a mist. Elena walked slowly, sipping the chamomile, feeling the warmth spread through her chest again. The streets glistened under the streetlights, and somewhere a block away a bus sighed to a stop. She thought about the new mother and her baby, about the student who would ace her midterm because someone believed she could, about the old man reading his book and the couple sharing pie and Marcus feeding a proud stray cat. She thought about Daniel, not with pain this time but with a gentle gratitude for the years they'd had. And she thought about her own life, 42 years of ordinary days stitched together with moments of grace. By the time she reached her apartment, the tea was gone, but the warmth remained. She hung her coat, fed her goldfish named Mr. Darcy, and stood at her own window watching the mist drift between the streetlights. The city felt vast and small at once, full of strangers carrying their private weather, all of them moving through the night toward morning. Elena brushed her teeth, changed into soft flannel pajamas, and slipped into bed. The rain had stopped entirely now, leaving only quiet. As she drifted toward sleep, the memory of the lantern stayed with her, the golden light, the gentle music, the smell of coffee and kindness. And in that liminal space between waking and dreaming, she felt connected to every other soul who had ever sought refuge in a late-night coffee shop, the heartbroken, the hopeful, the exhausted, the grateful. All of them finding, for a little while, a small warm room where the world slowed down enough to breathe. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to my StoriesVerseAi channel. Now, let's get back to the story. Outside her window, the city settled into deeper quiet. Inside, Elena slept peacefully, held by the gentle certainty that tomorrow there would be new babies born, new cookies shared, new records played, new kindnesses offered in the amber light. And somewhere across town, the lantern's sign still glowed softly, keeping its promise to anyone who needed it. The door is open, the light is on, you are not alone. The rain had been falling since dusk, a gentle, persistent whisper against the rooftops and streets of Portland's Alberta Arts District, turning the late November night into something softer, more introspective, as if the city itself had decided to slow down and breathe. It was just past midnight on a quiet Tuesday, the kind of hour when most sensible people were already tucked into bed, dreaming or scrolling mindlessly under warm covers, but for a few wandering souls, the world still held its gentle invitations. The Lantern Coffee Shop stood like a steadfast beacon on the corner of Northeast 28th and Alberta, its hand-painted sign glowing faintly in amber script, the bulb inside flickering just enough to feel alive rather than mechanical. The windows were fogged from the warmth inside contrasting with the chill outside, and through the misted glass, one could make out the low golden light spilling onto the sidewalk, pooling in soft puddles that reflected the street lamps and the occasional passing car's headlights sliding by like ghosts. Inside, the air was thick with the comforting aroma of freshly ground coffee beans, dark roast with hints of chocolate and earth, mingled with the subtle spice of cinnamon from the oatmeal cookies baking slowly in the back oven, and the faint, creamy sweetness of steamed milk. The old radiator in the corner hummed a low, steady song, countering the damp cold that tried to seep through the cracks in the century-old brick walls. Exposed Edison bulbs hung from the ceiling on black cords, each one casting a warm, intimate circle of light over the mismatched wooden tables and worn leather armchairs that had been collected over the shop's 25 years of existence. The floorboards creaked softly underfoot, polished by countless shoes, and the walls were lined with local art, watercolors of misty forests, black and white photographs of old Portland streetcars, and a few abstract pieces in soothing blues and grays that seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it. Behind the counter, Marcus moved with the unhurried grace of someone who had found peace in routine. He was 38, broad-shouldered, with a close-cropped beard going salt and pepper at the edges, and arms covered in tattoos that told stories of a younger, wilder life, ships and anchors from his Navy days, a phoenix rising from ashes inked the week he celebrated 5 years sober, and a small lantern on his wrist that matched the shop's logo, a gift from the owner when he'd become manager. He wore a faded black apron over a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, and hummed along quietly to the record spinning on the vintage turntable, Bill Evans' Waltz for Debbie, the piano notes drifting like snowflakes, light and uninsistent, filling the space without demanding attention. Marcus loved these late shifts. The shop officially closed at midnight, but he always kept the open sign flipped for another hour or two, knowing that some nights, people needed a refuge more than they needed sleep. Elena pushed through the heavy wooden door at 12:23 a.m., the little bell above tinkling softly, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. She shook the rain from her coat, a navy wool pea coat that had seen better days but still kept her warm, and ran a hand through her dark, shoulder-length hair, now frizzing slightly from the humidity. At 42, Elena carried herself with the quiet competence of someone who had spent 2 decades in labor and delivery nursing, guiding new lives into the world and holding hands through the hardest moments. Her scrubs were hidden under the coat tonight, but the faint scent of hospital antiseptic still clung to her, mixing with the rain and the coffee aroma as she stepped deeper into the warmth. Her hazel eyes were tired, soft at the edges from a 12-hour shift, but they brightened instinctively at the familiar embrace of the lantern. She didn't need to speak. Marcus was already reaching for the pour-over setup, knowing her order by heart, decaf Ethiopian blend, slow brewed, with a splash of oat milk and just a whisper of honey. Elena nodded her thanks and chose her usual spot, the corner armchair by the rain-streaked window, the one with the slight wobble in its left leg and the small tear in the leather arm where countless fingers had worried at the foam inside. She sank into it with a quiet sigh, the chair accepting her like an old friend, molding to her shape as she tucked her legs beneath her. Outside, the street was nearly deserted, only the occasional car hissed by on wet tires, headlights cutting brief golden paths through the darkness before vanishing. A lone bicycle rider pedaled past, rain cape flapping, and farther down the block, the neon sign of the Thai restaurant blinked intermittently, casting pink reflections on the puddles. The shop held only a handful of other souls tonight, each in their own quiet orbit. At the long communal table near the pastry case sat Lila, a 21-year-old University of Oregon junior home for Thanksgiving break, her green Ducks hoodie pulled up over her messy bun, earbuds in as she typed furiously on her MacBook. Papers and highlighters were spread around her like a small battlefield, psychology midterm tomorrow, and the anxiety was written in the tension of her shoulders and the way she kept rubbing her eyes. 2 seats down, Mr. Harlan, everyone just called him Harlan, sat with his usual black coffee, no cream, no sugar, reading a dog-eared copy of East of Eden. He was 78, retired from the post office, widowed 5 years now, and came in most nights around 11 to read until closing. His knit cap was pulled low, and his gnarled hands turned the pages slowly, savoring Steinbeck's words like fine wine. Closer to the front window, a young couple, Sophie and Jamal, shared a small table, their knees touching under it as they split a slice of Marionberry pie with 2 forks. They spoke in low murmurs, laughing softly now and then, the kind of laughter that comes from being newly in love and still surprised by how good it feels. Sophie's hand rested lightly on Jamal's wrist as she told him about her day teaching 3rd grade, and he listened with that particular attentiveness that made her feel seen. They had met at this very shop 6 months ago, both reaching for the same last blueberry muffin on a rainy Saturday morning, and now Tuesday late nights had become their ritual. Elena watched them all with the gentle detachment of someone who had learned to observe without intruding. She had always been good at reading rooms, at sensing the unspoken stories people carried. It was a skill honed from years of sitting with laboring mothers, reading the fear in their eyes or the triumph when the pain finally crested. Tonight, her own story felt heavy in her chest, not crushing, just present, like a familiar stone in her pocket. The shift had been long, 3 deliveries, 1 complicated C-section, and the usual chaos of a busy maternity ward. But the highlight had been little Noah, born at 10:47 p.m. to a first-time mom named Kayla who had arrived terrified and alone except for her sister. Elena had stayed with her through every contraction, coaching her breathing, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement until Noah's first cry filled the room and Kayla's tears turned from pain to joy. The father had arrived just in time, rushing in from a late shift at the warehouse, still in his high-vis vest, and the way he'd held his son for the first time, tentative, reverent, had made Elena's own heart ache with a tenderness she rarely let herself linger on. Marcus brought her coffee over on a small wooden tray, setting it down with a quiet, "Here you go, Elena." His voice was low, warm, the kind that didn't startle. She smiled up at him. "Thanks, Marcus. You're a lifesaver." He lingered a moment, wiping a non-existent spot on the table with the bar towel slung over his shoulder. "Heard you had a busy one tonight. Everything good?" She nodded, wrapping her hands around the mug, feeling the heat seep into her palms. "Yeah. A beautiful baby boy. Healthy lungs," he let the whole floor know he'd arrived. Marcus chuckled softly. "That's the best sound in the world." He moved back to the counter, leaving her to her quiet. She sipped slowly, letting the coffee's gentle bitterness and subtle floral notes bloom on her tongue. The record shifted to "Peace Peace," Bill Evans' fingers drawing out long, meditative chords that seemed to stretch time itself. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music and the rain and the warmth wash over her. Memories drifted in unbidden, the way they do on tired nights, her own wedding to Daniel 20 years ago, dancing in a backyard under string lights to Norah Jones, the 2 miscarriages that had quietly reshaped their dreams, the slow unraveling of their marriage until Daniel moved north to Seattle for a job that felt like an escape for both of them. They had loved each other once, deeply, but grief has a way of carving out space that love sometimes can't fill. She didn't hate him for leaving, she understood. And in the years since, she'd built a life that was good, friends from the hospital who met for hikes on Mount Tabor, a small garden where she grew tomatoes and basil every summer, books stacked on every surface of her apartment, and nights like this at the Lantern that felt like coming home. Opening her eyes, she noticed Lila across the room pause her typing, rest her forehead on her folded arms for a moment, shoulders shaking almost imperceptibly. The girl was crying, quietly, trying to hide it, but the exhaustion and pressure were winning. Elena's heart went out to her immediately. She remembered those college nights, the terror that you weren't enough, that one bad grade could derail everything. Without overthinking it, Elena stood, walked to the pastry case, and selected the largest chocolate chip cookie still warm from the oven, gooey center, crisp edges, sea salt on top. She carried it over and set it gently beside Lila's laptop. The girl looked up, startled, eyes red-rimmed. "Oh, I didn't," she started, but Elena just smiled softly. "You look like you could use something sweet. No strings. Just fuel for the fight." Lila stared at the cookie, then at Elena, and her face crumpled for a second before she pulled it together. "Thank you," she whispered. I really needed this." Elena touched her shoulder lightly. "You've got this. Whatever it is. One breath at a time." She returned to her seat, feeling the small glow of having eased someone else's burden, even briefly. Time passed in that gentle, elastic way it does in warm rooms on rainy nights. Harlan finished his chapter, marked his place with an old bus ticket, and stood slowly, joints creaking. He nodded at Marcus, left a $5 on the table for his $2 coffee, and shuffled out into the mist without an umbrella. Rain never bothered him much. Sophie and Jamal finished their pie, sharing the last bite, and gathered their things. As they passed Elena's table, Sophie smiled shyly. "Your cookie gesture was really kind," she said softly. Elena shrugged, warmth rising in her cheeks. "We all need kindness on nights like this." They left hand in hand, the bell tinkling behind them like a gentle goodbye. Now it was just Elena, Marcus, and Lila, who had eaten the entire cookie and was typing again with renewed focus, posture a little straighter. The rain eased to a soft patter, and Marcus changed the record to Norah Jones, "Come Away With Me," her voice low and smoky, wrapping around the room like a blanket. Elena finished her coffee, carried the mug to the counter. "You heading out soon?" Marcus asked, rinsing a few cups. She leaned against the counter. "In a bit. Not quite ready for the empty apartment yet." He nodded, understanding completely. He pulled out his tin of loose-leaf chamomile lavender tea, the one he kept for nights when coffee wouldn't do. "Want something softer?" She accepted gratefully. While the tea steeped, they talked, the easy, meandering conversation of two people who had shared many late nights. He told her about the gray tabby cat that had started visiting the back door every evening, named her Asha, meaning hope, too proud to come inside but willing to eat turkey from his hand and let him scratch behind her torn ear. Elena told him more about Noah's birth, how Kayla's sister had held one hand while Elena held the other, how the father had cried unashamedly, how the baby's tiny fingers had wrapped around Elena's gloved thumb with surprising strength. They didn't speak directly of loneliness, but it hovered gently between them, acknowledged without judgment. Marcus had his own history, addiction, loss, rebuilding, and Elena had hers. The lantern had become their neutral ground, a place where stories could be shared without expectation. When the tea was ready, Marcus poured it into a to-go cup lined with a cardboard sleeve. "For the walk," he said. "Mist still out there." She thanked him, left a 10 for the $4 tea, and pulled on her coat. At the door, she paused, looking back at the golden room, the soft lights, Lila still studying quietly. "Marcus," she said, "thank you for keeping the light on." He smiled, that deep, genuine smile. "Always will." Safe walk home. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely, leaving only a cool, clean scent in the air and the quiet shimmer of wet pavement under streetlights. Elena walked slowly, sipping the tea, feeling its floral calm spread through her. The city felt intimate at this hour, porch lights glowing in windows, a distant dog barking once, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. She passed the closed bookstore, the little plant shop with succulents in the window, the mural of a giant heron on the side of the laundromat. Her thoughts drifted peacefully, to the babies she'd welcomed, the mothers she'd comforted, the small kindnesses exchanged tonight. To Daniel, with fondness rather than regret. To her own life, rich in ways she hadn't planned, full of quiet grace. By the time she reached her apartment building, a converted Victorian with creaky stairs and original hardware, she felt lighter. She fed Mr. Darcy the goldfish, watered the pothose on the windowsill, and stood for a moment looking out at the sleeping neighborhood. The mist hung low, softening everything, and somewhere far off, a train whistle sounded, low and mournful and beautiful. In her soft flannel pajamas, Elena slipped into bed, the sheets cool at first then warming to her. The tea's calm lingered, and the memory of the lantern stayed with her, the amber light, the gentle music, the shared quiet humanity. As sleep crept in, she felt connected to every soul who had ever found solace in such a place, the grieving, the hopeful, the weary, the content. All of them held gently in the night's embrace. And across town, the lantern's sign still glowed softly, Marcus locking up at last, Asha the cat waiting patiently by the back door for her midnight snack. The world turned quietly toward morning, full of small mercies and new beginnings waiting in the light. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to my StoriesVerseAi channel. As this story fades away, let your thoughts drift, your body relax, and may you fall into the deepest, calmest sleep. Good night.